So here it is, chapter 9. This one is called Treatment, and like with a lot of chapters in this book, this one is a very good one, and there will be some spoilers in this one. So about halfway through, I'll let you know when a big spoiler is coming up, just for anyone who doesn't want to have anything key or anything spoiled for them. So the chapter starts with discussion about addiction and sort of detox treatments, and they say that addiction is not simply biologically determined, it is a social experience that is not amenable to a magic bullet biomedical solutions. So here what they're discussing is methadone and the way that it's they were hoping, like the methadone treatments were hoping it was just a solution, because what methadone does, which I've learned from this book, is it blocks the receptors, so it stops heroin withdrawals, and but the downside of methadone is it can create methadone cravings as well. So it starts off again with the characters Tina and Carter, and although in my last summary / review or whatever I call these things, although I said that the focus on Tina and Carter wasn't quite so interesting in the last chapter, I think that was actually just because I'd not read it one after the other, because reading this chapter really reminded me of how much you come to care about these characters throughout the book, because as each chapter goes along you really learn about Tina and Carter's lives, and what this book does a really good job of is humanising drug addicts, showing they're real people with real lives and real feelings. So anyway, it starts off with Tina trying to get on to a detox program, and this picture here is of, in my understanding, of Tina about to get in a car where she will be taken to the detox program. So it discusses how before they even go to the program, Tina wants to get some crack and some heroin for her last ever hit or whatever, and it's a bit of a bad situation because they only make it to the hospital-like place with 40 minutes to go. But luckily, Tina manages to get on the program, and that appears quite good. Then I'm just having a little look. So what happens after? So then there's a bit more emotive language and description about her when she's in the program, and how her mum comes to visit her, and the researchers visit her. I think his name's Jeff, and we really see that she wants to get off heroin. So so then they say, so then we have a bit of discussion about a few other peripheral characters in the book, and we see that they mention how, again, the failing treatment services in the United States. So it says, no one recognised the root of the problem was the precarious funding for treatment services in the United States. Facing imminent incarceration for failing to find a treatment slot, Ben went on a shoplifting spree. So what they're discussing here is there's this character Ben who I think he got arrested for shoplifting, and they said to him, you can go on a treatment service instead of going to prison and try and get off heroin, and they'll give him treatment and I suppose try and get him into work. That may not be the case, but it seems better from what they're saying. It seems better to go into the treatment. So basically Ben had lots of trouble getting into the treatment. He claims we often heard whites claim that programs were partial to the N-word, and heard heterosexuals denounce the treatment as full of bull dykes and faggots. So basically, they struggled to get into treatment, and what they're saying is this lack of funding for treatment created a situation where Ben couldn't get into treatment and was going to go to prison anyway. So he just went on a huge shoplifting spree. So then they start talking about the absence of post-detox services. So it links back to Tina and her interactions with the detox centre and the help she received there. So what happens is, it's quite sad, because she was very motivated to get off heroin, and she gets... The fact is, once she gets off the program, it's like they throw her back out into the world. The counsellors tried to look for somewhere for her to stay, but there was nowhere that was suitable, or nowhere that they could get her into. So she went back, I believe, to the Edgewater Boulevard, which puts her in the situation with all the drug addicts. So, I'm just having a little look just to make sure I haven't missed anything. So, what I find interesting is they do mention Tina took full responsibility for her relapse, despite her counsellor's inability to locate post-detoxing housing and services. So that was quite interesting, just the fact that the characters, or that the researchers sort of identify that and sort of solidify that in your mind. Then it says, predictably, the most long-term indignant heroin injectors and crack smokers relapse on multiple occasions before they finally ceasing to engage in personally destructive patterns of drug use. Okay, so without this is what was interesting. Without substantial institutional resources, it's difficult for long-term chronic users to figure out how to pass the time of day. They have to construct a new personal sense of meaning and dignity. Instead, they often fall back into their familiar and persuasive righteous dopefiend's ways of being. So this again sort of shows how she went back to the boulevard, and she didn't know what to do. They haven't really addressed what to do post detox. So it's all been well and good. She's felt all positive. She's wanted to get off heroin. Then she comes out, and she's in this world where she's back with drug addicts. She doesn't really know how to pass the day, and the problem persists. So again, that's a very interesting situation. Then they talk about how she fell to an even, like, the lowest low she's ever fallen to, because she goes and lives on a bin. Like, she builds an encampment that looks like rubbish, so she camouflages it with rubbish, like, by a bin. And she was really feeling down on herself for not keeping up with her treatment. And here's quite an emotive picture of her by the bin that I suppose she lived by, or next to. I hope I'm doing this justice. This is the final chapter. There is one more that is the conclusion, but this is the final chapter. So I really want to cover this in detail, and I am a little tired. So then they mention methadone and biopower. So this is where it gets a bit more theoretical for any anthropologists out there. So this is quite useful. It's page 284 if anyone's interested. They mention Foucault, or Foucault, whatever you want to call him, and it's indestructive conflict, or intradiscursive conflict. And Foucault says that this is an aspect of discourse that relates to another. So what they're saying here is So they're talking about methadone in this case, and they're saying that in the US there's a problem with methadone because it's viewed as both a medicine and a dangerous drug, and this is why there is an intra-discursive conflict, because there is a conflict that relates into two things: the dangerous drug and the medicine. So then I've also noted down some crazy facts about methadone. I'm a little worried the thing will cut out, but hopefully it won't, because I should have some memory on my iPad. So methadone and heroin stimulate the same neurotransmitters in the brain, and the first time the individual consumes methadone, he or she falls into a deep, pleasure-filled nod, which is like what heroin addicts or heroin users do when they inject heroin. So, and then they talk about how it really, the doctors call it a tolerance for methadone, but lots of users describe it as a physical craving more powerful than heroin. So I noted that down because I thought, wow, that's ridiculous. They're giving them something that's more powerful than heroin, like it's still within the addictive patterns. However, they did say that for hundreds of thousands of former heroin addicts, methadone has been a life-saving substance that dramatically reduces their suffering. So there's sort of this crossover. Again, I think this links to the intra-discursive conflict. I don't know if they bring it in for this specific problem, but they may do. That might be why they mentioned it earlier. Because there is the problem of it being a addictive substance, but it also minimises their withdrawal symptoms. So it's a complex issue, possibly not one to discuss quite here because I'm reviewing the book. Sorry, tired. So then they discuss again the lack of funding and how this affects the methadone programs. So basically, what happens? I've literally written on my note, doses were shit. So what happens is they get irregular dosing systems, so it makes it harder for them to what it does is the rapid tapering of the dose caused severe withdrawal symptoms, so it made it much harder to stick with this. And then what they say in the book is this is another form of symbolic violence that encouraged vulnerable individuals to blame themselves for their lack of willpower. So this again I really understood, because what it's saying is it's underfunded, so it's kind of creating this problem, and then they feel like we're just not strong enough. And you actually see somewhere later in the book that people say, I just wasn't strong enough. I think it's actually in the next bit, the next ethnographic account. So moving on to the next part, they talk about coercive treatment, which is Carter gets arrested and he goes on a treatment program that is basically he has to go on a treatment program or go to prison. And again, this is where you start to learn a bit more about Carter's life, and it made me reminisce on the earlier parts of the book, and just care about how much you care about the characters. And then it really describes how he's so pleased, because it turns out that he has a keychain with Narcotics Anonymous milestones of 30 days, 3 months, and 6 months, and he talks earnestly about this and how he's so excited about this. And then he has a graduation program where you can visually see, which is quite powerful, how happy he is. But now here's where the spoiler is. I meant to say that a minute ago. Just spoiler alert, stop watching now. Not saying anything bad happens, stop watching now. So here's the spoiler, and quite sad actually. Carter dies, And in the page before, I wrote, "Wow, good treatment," because what happens is there's a camaraderie. He said Carter describes how he cried with these men, and he built up a rapport, and all the men, when they had their like graduation from this program, they were all wearing suits, and many graduates burst into tears at the podium in front of the microphone when they were handed their diplomas. Several of them thanked the district attorney for arresting them. So that is powerful. Wow, that hits home. And then you find out Carter dies. It's just a sentence all of a sudden. It doesn't even feel like justice, because it's everything's being described as this positive situation, and then 2 weeks later Carter died. It's not even on another paragraph. It's there. Like, mate, I'm going to get enthusiastic about this in a sad way, because it just comes out of nowhere. It's quite sad. So then they describe the fume. Yeah, it has actually hit me. It didn't hit me so much when I was reading, because I was in a rush to try and get it done. But yeah, it's very sad, because then they describe the funeral arrangements, and yeah, just a very sad situation, because he gets himself sorted, and then I think he goes back to heroin one day. And I was talking to someone a minute ago, and they were saying how often when people relapse, they take what they used to take, and that can make them overdose. But I was sort of looking at it in a very in a sad way. It's almost like irony. It's like there's this. He finally got clean, and he got a glimpse of this life that he could have, and things were going well, and then he relapsed, and that was it. And it was the situation they described is even more sad, because when he did relapse, he was nodding, as they say, and he got robbed. Like he got robbed, and they took all his money, and then he died, or they robbed him when he died. I'm not really sure, but from what it sounds like, they robbed him as he was like passed out, and they could have put him in a position, but instead they just robbed him, and he died. So it was very sad. And then they talk about his death as a patriotic death, because the family wanted the what's it called, casket or whatever it is, to be buried as a war hero thing, because Carter used to be in the military. So then we see this picture, and there's just a little bit of description about the way the soldiers fired guns, and there was a bit of a respectful ceremony there. But yeah, I think the more moving thing was the open casket, when Tina went to the viewing at the funeral parlour, and we hear about the way that wow, I didn't realise, I missed this. The church was packed with close to 100 people, and that we hear about what the pastor's saying, and how he just talks about some stuff about like denouncing crack dealers, and it's just a sad situation. So a very powerful, moving book. And one thing that I was reminded of at the end was just really the fact that they are humanizing these people. They're not, in my opinion, they're not endorsing this. They're not beautifying it. They're not making it, romanticizing it in any way. They really show the brutality of the actual situation of the world, and it's very intertwined. It's very their choice, very, it could be helped by the social services if there was more funding. It's a complex situation, but I think the thing that this book really does well, I'm worried the time is going to run out, the thing this book really does well is it humanizes them. It makes you realize they're real people, they have real families, and real aspirations, you know. He was doing well, and that one slip up cost him his life. So yeah, sad. just is what it is. So then I am going to read the conclusion at some point. I hope everyone's enjoyed this video. Please leave us a like. I've had some really positive comments lately, and yeah, that is my thoughts on it. I will be reading the conclusion possibly tomorrow, if not in a little while, like a couple of days, because I have got some other work to do. I've been very busy with essays and things. So thanks for all your positive comments, and that is Righteous Dope Fiend. All the chapters read. Kind of very, very good book. It's a public anthropology book, and I really recommend it to anyone, even if you've watched all of these reviews. Really worth a read if you want to understand this sort of situation, and it's also good for learning about public anthropology in a good way, in my opinion. In fact, the best way, in my opinion, of presenting ethnography, which is the anthropological technique. This way they present it with pictures and engage the audience is brilliant, in my opinion. So thanks for watching, guys. Goodbye.